Hi, I'm Somer Hackley,
Hi, I'm Zen Mac. This is the Art of Search Hiring Manager series.
and these are stories and insights about all things hiring. Well, Zen, it is so good to see you again this week. Thanks for being here.
Hello.
Yes, I would love to introduce you today to our guest, George Brady. I've known George for nearly a decade, and I worked with him at his previous company as a hiring manager, and I can confidently say he's just one of the best. Like he's the kind of person you say his name to someone and they just go on. Like if you just say, "Oh, I used to work with George Brady," like forget it. Like they just go on and on. And George, you might know this, but it's so true. Like people talk about you behind your back in a good way all the time. And I saw him in action, and he has this ability to be collaborative while at the same time being unafraid to make decisions, which is not easy to balance. And he just sets the bar when it comes to candidate experience. And in terms of background, George is currently the Chief Information Officer at loanDepot. So he's the company's top technology executive, and he has 30 plus years of technology and innovation leadership across a variety of financial services firms. Well, George,
Wow.
it is so great to see you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Summer.
Of course.
Very nice to meet you, George.
Nice
Well,
to meet you as well, Zen.
and yeah, what a story. Well, tell us about there's so many things and aspects about hiring and as a hiring manager. I think I want to focus a little bit on candidate experience. Like, what in your experiences have been best practices or perhaps like philosophies around the candidate experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zen. So let me just say, starting from my own personal position with over 30 years of experience, I have been on the other side of the recruiting process 7 times through that period of time, and so I've experienced good and bad candidate experiences, to be honest with you. And so both through being on that side of it and being on the other side, on the hiring side, at several different companies, I really have come to appreciate. There's certain things that hiring managers can and should do to set the right conditions. From my perspective, if I'm working back I always work back from kind of what's going to be best for the candidate themselves. It's really about having quality interactions, with every person that they're meeting with a compressed timeline. Those two
Mm-hmm.
things are really, really important, because obviously you're trying to find the best person. They're trying to assess the hiring managers. They're trying to assess the company, the culture of the company, and how good of a fit that they're gonna be in that process. And so, to do that, to really kind of strike that right balance of quality interactions and compressed timeline, there's a few ways that I think about this. One is how you set the table for the candidate before you even see the first person, right? And if you're working with a great search consultant, they're gonna obviously guide you through this process. So depending on the size of the company that you're working at, you may have a very well-defined structure, or you may have no structure whatsoever, and you're having to either work with your recruiter, your internal recruiter, and or your search consultant, and create an experience that is really, really positive for the candidate. Let me talk about the setting the table process, which for me is before the first candidate comes in the door. It starts with a really well written role mandate. It seems kind of simple to state that up front, but I've been involved in enough important searches that when you think about the words you put on the page that the candidate's first seeing before they even talk to a recruiter or a search consultant, the words matter. They're trying to make a connection to the role, to the hiring manager, and to the culture of the company. So I spent a lot of time getting a good quality role mandate in place and reviewing it with key stakeholders in the company, especially if it's a senior hire, getting really, really clear about what you're looking for. The other thing I look for, having worked at several different companies, is I like to understand what have been the historical career derailers for other hires in the past. And
Mm.
so if you're at a company for just a couple of years, you may not fully understand those yet. So you might have to engage your peers or other people around you to help you with that. But if you can really understand those career derailers, like what has short circuited lateral hiring in the past in the company, and how do
Mm.
I avoid that same mistake from happening again? So that's really, really important. It's worth spending a little bit of time understanding that, and then choosing your interviews really, really carefully. Again, this is this is a relationship, these tend to be relationship-based roles. And so the people you're picking to do the interviews, that is setting the foundation of the relationships this individual is going to have coming into the company, assuming you get to offer and hire them. And so you want to pick the right people that you believe are essential to the success of the role, and are going to be helpful to that person, coming into the company and getting them beyond, if you will, the first 30, 60, 90 days, and making sure that they're really getting acclimated into the culture. Once the interviewing starts, so that's kind of setting the table. If you've got that in place, I think you've got, good interviewers, you've got a good role mandate, you've got a good understanding about, how to pick the right candidates. That's feeding into your interview process with your search consultant. Then I look for really rigorous upfront interviewing of candidates. Again, if you've got a good recruiter you're working with internally, if you've got a good search consultant you're working with, they will do a lot of the heavy lifting of that. But you got to their process up front is only as good as the input that they're getting from the hiring manager. So it's really, really important. Again, that pre-work sets the condition for the first few people in the door are getting a great experience. Because otherwise, if you don't do a lot of that upfront planning, you're getting you're getting a candidate that's going through the first half a dozen will wind up going through a process that's less than optimal. And if you happen to have that great candidate as one of the first few that you think is the one you want to hire, you may screw it up if you haven't really kind of set the table accordingly there. And so, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just, as you were talking, I just keep coming back to how much ownership you took of that you're setting the table and you didn't outsource that to your search consultant or your internal recruiter or quite frankly, someone on your team, right? The fact that you're using these words of these active, like you went and talked to other people, you selected your interview panel, you went and looked at all these people who may have traditionally have been successful or not so successful in these types of roles, and the active role that you participated is what I got loud and clear as you were
no, it's a great point, and I say that I'm probably intentional in saying that because you don't always have the conditions in the company that you're working in. There may not be, if you will, the HR scaffolding to support you, right? So you may be have a thin HR function, maybe a very good recruiter that you're working with, but that may be all you have. And so you really have to take responsibility for that experience end to end. And again, in bigger companies that I've worked, I've also, there's been a lot of support around that to make it easier for that hiring to happen and for that experience to be quality. But I don't take it for granted. I've worked at big companies, I've worked at small companies, and you got to take ownership and accountability for sure.
Well, while we have you, could you share a story, maybe regarding a search for a new position that maybe had never existed in a company before and how you were able to kind of make it such a smooth process, right? HR scaffolding, recruiting support, all those things aside. Can you share that story with us?
So I'm happy to. There's one really unique example that comes to mind. And again, it was, I'll describe a little bit of the condition inside the company because company was going through a pretty big transformation. I was a couple of years into my role as CTO of the company, and we were on this pretty massive migration into the public cloud, and so we were having to confront both so much going on from an AI and a machine learning perspective, but also like having to confront our data environment in a massive data science army inside the company, right? So as you start to think about a move into the cloud, the disruption that has to happen to your data infrastructure and a move like that, we really needed a leader that was, that had the right combination of skills, that had vision, that really was like, could really kind of lean forward in thinking about this, that could, kind of tangle with the top data scientists in the company and kind of win them over, could have the technical arguments and win them over and kind of, really drive the larger team and the company, get them rallied around a vision. And so when we positioned for this search, again, I spent a lot of time on the role mandate, spent a lot of time kind of working through. I made a tweak in the approach in the screening of candidates. And normally I would do like all of the kind of first level screening working with the search consultant. But I knew because of the dynamic inside the company that we had this massive army of data scientists. And the success of this individual was going to be so dependent on these people in the business, these leaders across the business that had to get behind them during what would no doubt be very challenging times working through a transformation, that I had to make sure that before I got too many people into the process, that I had line of sight to people that I felt good about and that my counterparts in the business felt good about. And so I reached out to one of the senior most leaders we had in a part of our business that was overseeing this kind of big data science function.
Mhm.
And I asked this person, I said, look, I'm going to ask you something I've never asked anyone before in my life. And I don't know if you're going to be up for it, but I want you to agree to pre-screen candidates with me. So we're gonna get on a call two on one, and we're gonna screen candidates. And while that may feel a little bit choppy, we spent a little bit of time up front again on the role mandate. I said, what it's going to give the candidate is a real good understanding of the dynamic inside the company. One, because you want to know what you're getting into. But before we advance anybody into that first round of interviews, and into our process, I wanted to be certain that like we had at least two really positive signs of yeah, this one's a good one, before they actually got into our pipeline. And so that really helped up front. It was a huge time commitment on the part of this executive. So I was grateful that he was willing to do it. Again, I don't think anybody had ever asked him to do that before either. So I think he was sort of both surprised and terrified at the same time. But he kind of went with it, and it worked out really well, because as we were putting candidates through the process, we had really high quality people. And when we got to the end, the candidate that we wound up selecting, she was reluctant to come to the company. So I will tell you, I had to alter my process in this. So I try to stay connected to people with candidates throughout the process. But in this particular case, I had to go back, and she was New York based. I was based in Virginia. I had to fly to New York, and I really had to sell her at the end, because she was not. She was a little bit worried, and I'm going to be very honest about my background, because I've worked in investment banking, and so there was a little bit of that. Oh, you're one of those people, and so I had to really kind of take a little bit more time, and we had to take time together and get to know each other and get her comfortable with that this was going to be this really was the right setup for her, and this was going to be a great opportunity for her. And I'm happy to say that even though she's no longer in that role, she was in the company for over 7 years. She was promoted beyond that role, took on a major CIO role within the company after I left. And so I'm really proud of that, because I not only got somebody in the door, I got a really high quality senior leader that was absolutely loved inside the company. But it took the right kind of structure in the recruiting process and the search process to get there.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, if I drew the line all the way back to when you built the role and had that structure set up and asking the other executive to participate, that probably made a huge difference in the team's buy-in of the candidates that you presented, but also in her engagement in the job too. Whether or not we could attribute it to that, I think it mattered that there was that
I agree.
buy-in.
I agree with you. Her starter network, she was connected in with all the right people, because they were all anchored into the interviewing process, right? They all
Yeah,
helped me to pick the person that was going to be in the role. So they
yeah.
had a vested interest in her success. And they wanted her to be. They knew she was coming in to do a difficult role, and they wanted her to be successful. And I think that just, credit to her, because honestly, I think the culture. There's a whole bunch of things that are challenges for any new executive, but at the end of the day, you have to be really good to stand up for that period of time and to have the success that she had.
I
That's
love
such a
this. I
thank you.
sorry, Zen. Yeah, thank you for
Yeah, go
sharing,
for it.
George. I've been taking notes, because I think you have created a few catchphrases that are pretty great, like HR scaffolding. I might even think about recruiter scaffolding or starter network. And it's just so key to think of it that way, that these relationships start here. It's not after the person starts. And the fact that you're taking that ownership and you're talking to them throughout the process, and you have that open line of communication, and everyone you're having them meet is a relationship and a first impression. And who knows what sort of allies and just support and onboarding, all of that, like what will come from day one during the interview, and just having that set up. I love what you said about being so deliberate, starting maybe a little slower, not slow, but just being
Right.
deliberate before
It's
you
going
just go
slow to go
fast.
fast,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
with the right setup, you're going to go fast when the candidates come in the door. But
Yes.
if you don't have the conditions set up inside the company, even with the best search consultants, you're gonna struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
The
Yeah. Well, this
floodgates
was,
open and you can't deal with it properly.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
yes. All right. Well, that is it for today. George, thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot of wisdom here. I'm sure people will get some great takeaways and really appreciate your time and perspective.
Yeah, thank you both.